So just because it's winter doesn't mean you have to stop riding your bike. In this video, I'm going to give you guys a tour of my winter commuter. If you bought a patch, a pin, a sticker, or a print in the last couple of days, chances are I delivered it to the post office with this bike. This is my Velo Orange Polyvalent that I've tricked out since you've last seen it, so it works better in the snow and the ice. So one of the reasons I like using this bike for a commuter bike is actually the front end geometry. It's built around a lowered trail design. I believe the trail is in the 40s, so not quite as low as a ultra low trail bike, but definitely lower than your typical endurance bike. And what that means is that when I put a front load in the basket, the front end is a little bit less floppy and it rides more like a normal bike. If all the stuff about trail confuses you, check out this video up above where I do a deep dive into trail, how it affects handling, and which trail is right for you. So speaking of basket, let's move from front to back here. In the front, I am using the Velo Orange flat pack rack, which is simply one of my favorite demi-porteur racks at the moment. It's got great adjustability in the stays, so you're able to mount it to many front ends, as well as this rod type connection here. Instead of a bendable aluminum stay, you can actually adjust the height of the rack and how it sits on your bike, which became pretty crucial on this setup just because I'm running these really big studded tires. But we'll go back to the tires in a little bit. Another fun touch is this wall basket that you'll notice has a green paint job, a little bit more interesting than the standard stainless steel one. You'll notice on the front here, I have swept back bars. This is a change from when I originally first got the bike. It had drop bars. It's got these really classy looking grips here, made in France by a brand called Restines that's been making them forever. One big notable change in the front end is the stem length. Originally, I had these bars with a 90mm stem, and 90 worked well for drop bars because the nature of the drops puts you out further. But with sweepbacks and that traditional road length stem, I found it made the overall cockpit a little too compact and the steering very, very twitchy. It put my hands way behind the steering axis, and any slight movement was really exaggerated. So to counteract that, I ended up swapping the stem from a 90 to a 120, and that places my hands a little bit more in line with the steering axis. It really chilled out the steering and made it for a better handling bike. Not a whole lot has changed in terms of the drivetrain. It's still the stock cranks and gearing. Perhaps the only other significant winter addition aside from these tires is the fender, which I get asked a ton about. This is a fender by the brand Topeak and is their Defender XC 129er. So made for 29er tires. And although these tires aren't 29er, I find they still work great because they are really wide and catch all that mud spray. One thing I love about this fender is that it's very easy to take on and take off. You can see it's just a locking cam here. So if you have multiple bikes like myself, it's really easy to move from bike to bike to bike. No, it doesn't provide the same coverage as a full fender. Yes, I understand that, but this strikes a nice balance of coverage and ease. Another cool thing about this fender is that this is infinitely adjustable. I could actually set it up so it sits a lot lower on the tire or a lot higher. Again, one of my favorite pieces of winter commuting kit. If for whatever reason you don't want to run the full fender, this is a pretty good substitute. So let's talk tires. This is probably the most significant upgrade that turns this from a summer bike into a winter bike. And on here, I've got some pretty fat studded meats. These are the Kava tires by 45 North. The stated width is 27.5 by 2.1. My measured width of the tire with some digital calipers on this rim measures out to about 2 inches or about 50mm. It's got a 60 TPI casing and 240 concave studs. So not the most supple tire if we're being technical here, but definitely a secure and safe feeling tire during the winter if you live in a place that gets lots of ice and snow. So one thing to know about this tire, if you're considering this, is that because it does have fairly tall and aggressive knobs and concave studs on top of that, although it doesn't get significantly wider than say a 650B by 48, it does get significantly taller. If you have tight clearances, in particular in the bottom bracket, you may find that the knobs and the studs will rub on your frame or cabling. So that is something to be aware of. To run these successfully, I think you need a bike that can comfortably clear 27.5 by 2.2, 2.3 inch tires. I know in the front of the bike, I did have to adjust the height of the rack because the initial position was rubbing on the top of the studs. So these are a really interesting tire. Not too long ago, the choices in 650B studs were very, very limited. This is a pretty interesting option if you have tire clearance because while not supple, it is definitely more supple than older tires. It's also tubeless compatible, so again, you can play around with slightly lower tire pressures, gain some of that suspension back, even though you're running a stiff casing and a studded tire. So I know one question that a lot of you are probably asking is why not just run a fat bike? So in our stable, I have a plus size bike, which is 650B by 3, as well as a fat bike. For me, the fat bike makes more sense on groomed trails or where you're encountering lots of kind of freshly packed snow, but using it as a urban commuter, depending on where you live, can be absolutely overkill. A tire like this is wide enough to go over some freshly packed snow, certainly enough to get me into city streets where a less fat tire, but still with studs, is advantageous. Short answer is a fat bike is great, but is pretty sloggy, especially if you run studs on them on paved streets. Again, where you live may vary, how you use your bike may vary, but for a urban commuter in a place that gets lots of freeze and thaw, a tire like this is an excellent choice. Overall, I've found them to be pretty grippy. I've not lost traction or slipped on the tires. Interestingly, I found when comparing a fat studded tire with something a little bit narrower, you actually get more grip and purchase into the ice with the narrower tire. The thinking is wider the tire gets, yes, there are more pins, but the weight is distributed differently. You get less pressure per pin. So you do get volume to roll over soft stuff, but you lose overall traction. Whereas something like this, since the tire is relatively narrower, it puts more pressure per pin and digs into that ice better. Studded tire selection is a balancing act. Do you get more snow or more ice? Is that snow really lumpy? Do you need the wider volume tire to get over it? Or can you get by with a narrower tire? Are you riding over more pavement? There are a lot of things to balance when choosing a studded tire. And thankfully, there are more options now. With brands like 45 North coming out with tires like the Kava, they also have another tire, which is 650B by 38 with studs. And I think that would be a little bit shorter overall, as well as a little bit narrower. So if you did want to run studded tires with a Fender, then that is a tire you guys should check out. So a quick disclaimer about these tires, the Kava was provided for review by 45 North. I'm not getting compensated to talk about the tire, and the opinions are my own. So what do you guys think of this winter bike build and of these tires and rack and all that? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to see if you are still riding in the snow, and let me know some details about your winter commuter. Studded tires or no studded tires? If you like this content, you know what to do, and keep the supple side down.